You know that smelly pile of dog doo-doo in the yard? We'll just go throw it in the garden. This is one of the many types of fertilizers that you can use to help crops grow. Farmers use fertilizer to reap the most out of their crops. I've had the enjoyment of working on a farm for many years and have seen the benefit of fertilizer myself. Fertilizer is very beneficial to crops because it helps produce better quality and higher production. You're going to hear about the history of fertilizer, pros and cons, and why I think fertilizer is a good idea. Fertilizer has been used for many years and has developed many different types and methods. First, we're going to talk about the history of fertilizer. According to the Living History Farm website, the use of fertilizer really exploded in the early 1940s. After the World Wars, nitrogen plants weren't used for bombs anymore and were used for fertilizer. Exploded because there was an extra amount of nitrogen and farmers began to realize the importance of nutrients in crops. Science tells us that plants need at least 16 certain nutrients to become healthy. In the early 1940s, farmers would just count on the natural fertility of the land to produce their crop. They would also use natural fertilizers like manure, and they'd go spread that in their fields. They'd also rotate their crops, where they would, one year they'd plant a crop like alfalfa, which is high in nitrogen, and that would replenish it into the ground, and then the next year they'd plant a crash crop. After they would plant alfalfa, they would switch back to a cash crop like corn, so then they could make more money. Then farmers would invest in irrigation systems, so they had to start planting cash crops every year to pay off this new system. This means that they had to stop their crop rotation and weren't replenishing the nitrogen in the ground anymore, so they had to find another way. This is when the government stopped using nitrogen for bombs and more for fertilizer. Nitrogen first came in a pellet form, which you could simply spread on the ground, and later became as anhydrous ammonia, or NH3, that you could inject into the ground. Even though we've come a long way since the 1940s, there are still some pros and cons that we should know. Cons. The cost and risk of using fertilizer. Fertilizer isn't cheap, and once you plant it, if you don't get any rain, then it could be all for nothing. You could have wasted money and not had a good crop that year to pay it off. Environmentalists complain about chemical runoff, which could run off into the water supply and damage it. And they also they also don't like the emissions that are let off when they're spreading it from the tractors and trucks and all that kind of stuff. Pros. There's many positives. A couple are they increase the amount of your crop, they increase the quality of your crop, and they add extra nitrogen into the ground for next year, so it'll make a better crop for the years to come, because you're always replacing the nitrogen in the ground. Even though there are different ways to use fertilizer, I'm going to tell you how I use it. The farmer that I help uses fertilizer in 3 different ways. He uses an anhydrous, a granular fertilizer, and a crop rotation. All of these can be very effective if used the right way. Anhydrous is injected into the ground commonly when seeding or disking. Granular fertilizer can either be spread on top of the ground or also injected with seeds when seeding. Crop rotation is where you plant the crop high in nitrogen so you can replenish the supply in the ground. The use of fertilizer is very beneficial because it increases the quantity and quality of your crop, which will make you more money in the long run. We also use manure because we have cows there too, so then we just use that and we'll go and spread that in the fields too. I got the old video here to show you an example of spreading fertilizer. This is a very simple way to spread it. You can just add your granular fertilizer in this tub and it hooks onto the back of your tractor. And there's a spreader at the bottom which just turns and spreads. Your fertilizer can come in different bags. Sometimes they come 40-pound bags. Depends how much you use them. These guys often use a lot, so they just use tractors to unload it. to start adjusting the pounds per minute so he doesn't spread too much, because then you can start wasting money. You sometimes have to spread this, or excuse me, you have to adjust this every once in a while going. And it just sprays it out, and then there's a monitor inside the cab where you can see where you've gone. And, yeah. So you get the picture of it there. Fertilizer is very beneficial to crops because it helps produce better quality and higher production. Now that I've told you about the history of fertilizer, pros and cons, and why I think fertilizer is a good idea, you can take it and apply it to your own life. Now I hope when you see a pile of dog doo-doo in the yard, instead of throwing it away, you use it to fertilize your garden and create a better, larger yield of your crop.